Good morning, everybody. It is springtime out. I don't know if you can see the bright green outside my window, but I'm very excited. I've got a number of springtime projects for you. This one today is a bud vase, and it's actually one that I did recently when traveling to Europe, so I thought I'd share it with you. It's a variation of my May Day basket or Easter basket that I shot earlier, in that it's a sandwiching technique, a 3D construction technique that involves the stacking of cookies. So this is largely an assembly video, so let's get started with what you'll need. Basically, it's a 5-piece project. I've got all the pieces out, and I'm just going to talk through how I cut them. You'll need 2 sides of your bud vase. These have already been iced and stenciled. I have a whole video on stenciling techniques, so I'm going to refer you off to that. This was cut with a standard teardrop cutter. I simply just cut it and then lopped off the top while it was on the cookie sheet to kind of flatten off the top. And you'll need 2 of those for the size of the vases. It's about 3 3/4 inch from top to bottom before I cut it off. And I'll have all these dimensions on my website too, so if you miss them here, no worries. You'll need a base. This was cut with a standard Atico fluted cutter, about 1.5 inches at least. You can get bigger. You can go, this might be more like 2 inches. You can go 2 to 3 inches on the base. That always looks good. And then you'll need a little piece for the lip, which again was cut with a standard Atico cutter, fluted cutter. Before I baked it, I cut a hole in the center, and this is to allow the flowers to fit through. And then the 5th piece that you'll need is just an insert. This too was cut with a standard Atico teardrop set, lopped off the top, and then I cut out a little bit of an insert before it baked, and this will allow the flowers to sit into the bud vase. Okay, so once you've got all those pieces top coated and decorated however you'd like, they should be completely dry, then you're ready to assemble. I have stenciled all of these. I like stenciling for this particular project because the design stays very, very flat, and then it makes it easier to stack everything. Actually, I'm going to add a few more details to this bud vase before we get going, because I like to add some highlights to the stencil work. So I'm going to add a few little white dots just to accent this. We'll just do it to one side so that I don't have to wait for it to dry and I can immediately assemble. So I've got my white icing of beadwork consistency, and all of those royal icing recipes and adjustments can be found on my website. And I'm just going to pipe a few little dots to highlight the stencil. By pushing very, very little, I can get small dots. And by pushing a little bit harder, I can get a bigger dot with the same hole in the cone. Right now I'm doing small dots along the edge here. I'll take them around to the side. Keep dotting, dotting. Try to be as vertical as possible when I'm doing dots, holding the cone as vertically as possible, just so they look rounded. And it's a relatively loose icing that forms a nice round dot on its own without me having to press down any peaks of any kind. Okay, looks good. Now to assemble the pieces, I like to work on bubble wrap, especially if there's any relief like the dots on top of the backside, because they can rub off if you turn it upside down on a hard surface. So that's going to be the back of the vase, and you want to make sure you've got nicely fitting pieces. I always check them before I ice them to match up the pieces that fit the best together, because you don't want to see one behind the other once it's fully assembled. Now to put this together, I'm using a thick royal icing, what I call my glue consistency, which is how my icing mixes up to start. It's very, very thick and pasty, and the thicker it is, the faster it dries, which makes it ideal for cookie construction. And I've matched the color to the dough. I've got a gingerbread here. It's just less likely to show up than if say, for instance, I was using white. Okay, more glue on top, and this is the sandwiching I'm talking about. I'm stacking cookies one on top of one another so that when I stand them upright, they hopefully stand on their own. The key thing here is to make sure the bottoms are in perfect alignment so that this stands straight up. And it seems pretty good. I always do a little bit of a test run, standing on its own in this case. And then I set it aside Looking at it front on too to make sure that it's nicely centered and one piece isn't showing behind the other. And then I'd set it aside probably for half an hour before I'd continue forward. It's just easier to assemble when the glue isn't sliding around. By that time it'll be completely dry. But since we're here live doing video, I'm going to try to accelerate the process for you. I've got my base here, and let's see what this measures, just because I think I misspoke the first time. Yeah, it's about 2¼ inches. And I usually go up to about 3 inches on these bases, and it still has it look proportionally okay. You can match, you can use the same stenciling color on it, or mix it up, or use a completely different colored base. That could look fun too. Here's another fun base. I think I'm going to stick it on the blue one because it seems to be fitting nicely on there. And again, for this purpose, I need a little more glue. I try to use as little as possible on the bottom so it doesn't peek out. And if I've aligned the bottoms of the pieces nicely, again, it should stand on its own. You want to make sure it's centered on the base. Looks like it's pretty centered. If you need to, you can always prop it while it's drying. And for that purpose, I have wood blocks that you could perch like so. And I think I'm going to do that while I put on the lip, just so it doesn't flop over. Sometimes I use really tall dragé containers as well for the same purpose. Now I've got my lip. I've simply outlined it with pink icing and put some beadwork around the edges. And if the tops aren't in alignment, you can always take a little microplaner. You want to do this beforehand and file them down so it lies flat, but it appears to be lying pretty flat. So I'm just going to glue that on top. Again, the same process, a little bit of thick royal icing glue, and I'm glad I have those props there because it's moving around a little bit because the icing is not yet dry. And then I put the little lip on the edge of the bud vase, and again, you want to check it from the side to make sure it's centered as well, front to back as well as side to side. I think that looks pretty good. And then the last touch is just filling it up. You could fill it with wafer paper flowers, which are flowers made from an edible paper, which I'll be talking about in a subsequent video, or you can fill them with my famous iced daisies and leaves, which have been marbled, and I'm going to show how to make those. There have been several requests to make, how did I make those? Because I have them in a bunch of other videos. But I've simply marbled these cookies in advance and then mounted them on flat coffee stirrers, actually, wood sticks. And they're of varying heights so that I can just slip them into that hole that I left in the center and create a little arrangement. And I think it's safe enough to move away the blocks so you can see the finished product. And there you have it, a beautiful little bud vase, perfect for springtime, Mother's Day, May Day, or what have you. In a subsequent video, we'll be talking about how to marble these flowers, as I told you, or how to fill them with wafer paper flowers. Till then, live sweetly.